We're gonna wait 1 minute, give folks some time to join us before we get started. Thank you all for being here. We're so excited to get started. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Juliana Yee. I currently serve as an Assistant Dean of Yale College and the Director of the Asian American Cultural Center at Yale. I want to extend a warm welcome to all of you as you join us for today's lecture event, which is the third of 4 amazing lectures that we have scheduled this week as part of our inaugural virtual Yale College Family Week 2020. You may access the week's full schedule of events and all relevant registration information at familyweekend.yalecollege.yale.edu. Wherever you might be tuning in from today, I sincerely wish you and your loved ones continued good health. I do also want to take a moment to acknowledge the lands on which we are settled upon. Yale University, located in New Haven, Connecticut, acknowledges that Indigenous peoples and nations, including the Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Scaticoke, Golden Hill Pagasit, Niantic, and the Quinnipiac and other Algonquin-speaking peoples have stewarded through the generations lands and waterways of what is now the state of Connecticut. So in recognizing that we are joining this event from different locations and areas today from all over the country, I invite all of you to just do some individual searching about the history of the land you are settled upon and the Indigenous history of the space you call home today, and to really engage in relationality with past and present beings of the land which you call home. I'm also going to share, for those who are interested, a link to the land acknowledgement that is on Yale's university website for your reference. Before we begin today, I want to quickly go over a few guidelines for today's event. Please feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself and where you are joining us from today. You can choose to either share your chat message with just the panelists, which is myself and Professor Kagan, or everyone on this call by selecting one of the 2 drop-down menu options right above your chat box window. You're welcome to certainly engage with one another in the chat throughout the event, but let's keep the conversation focused as much as possible on the content being discussed today. And if you have a question or comment at any point during the lecture, just type the word question or comment, and you will be unmuted to speak when called upon. Alternatively, if you don't want to be unmuted and called upon, you can also just use the Q&A feature to submit your question, and I will read it out on your behalf. So without further ado, it's my honor to introduce today's distinguished faculty, Professor Shelly Kagan, recipient of the 2020 Sidoni Miskimin-Klaus Prize for Teaching Excellence in the Humanities, delivering a lecture today titled, "Is Having Children Good for You?" Much of Professor Kagan's work focuses on the debate between consequentialist and deontological moral theories. He's perhaps most well known at Yale for his introductory lectures on death and ethics. More importantly, though, many of Professor Kagan's students over the years have just praised him for his ability to facilitate unfiltered discussion effortlessly and make complex ideas understandable without necessarily dumbing them down. So we are so fortunate to have Professor Kagan as a member of the Yale faculty, and I'm so thrilled that you will get a taste of what students appreciate so much about him with today's lecture. So without further ado, I'm gonna turn it over to Professor Kagan.
Great, well, welcome. I want to welcome all of you and reinforce one of the points that Juliana made kind of in passing. I'll say some things to get us going. I'm going to pose a kind of question for us, but what I want you to do really is just jump in. And so don't think of this as a standard lecture where I'm going to hold forth for 45 minutes and then we'll have a couple of minutes at the end for question and answer. The goal here really is for us to have something like a discussion. Obviously, we can't genuinely have, this isn't a seminar room. We have far too many people here to have the kind of back and forth we might have in a seminar. But I do want it to be the case that when you've got ideas about the topic that we'll be talking about, what I'd like you to do is to join in. And the way to do that most straightforwardly is in the chat box, write the word comment or write the word question. And Juliana, who I can't multitask, so I can't keep my eye on that, but I will have Juliana interrupt me and say, oh, so-and-so's got a question, and then that's what we'll do. She'll call on you, she'll unmute your mic, and then if you're comfortable, please just state your remark or ask your question or share your thought with everybody. As she said, if you're not comfortable, you can write something in the chat box or question and answer, and again, she'll do that for you. But if you're comfortable, that'll be better for all of us. The topic I want us to talk about today is actually one that I was sharing recently with the undergraduates. I teach a class this semester, which I teach now and again, called Life. And in this class, we talk about what are the sorts of things you ought to want for your own sake to go on in your life. What are the ingredients of the best kind of life for the person whose life it is? Almost all of us think that love is important, but we spent a week thinking about what is love and why is that worth having in your life? Almost all of us think that friendship is important, and we spent a week thinking about what is friendship and why is that something worth having in your life? This week, we're talking about questions like, what should you think about in choosing a career? I think next week, we think about questions like, what should you think about in choosing your education and picking classes and how to pick a major? One of the topics we talked about, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, was children. What does it do to your life to have a child or more than one child? And why do that to your life? As the topic, I forget the exact wording I settled on, but the topic, the title for today's session was something like, is having children good for you? Or is it better for your life? And that's the thing I want us to think about. Almost everybody in America, at least, does go on to have children at some point or the other. The last time I looked up statistics, I think it was something like, I don't know, 80 to 90% of American adults have had children. They may no longer be in the house or currently have children or plan to have children. So it's obviously an extremely common thing to do. But the question is, why do it? Now, I mean, you're here for Parents a Week, and so obviously, I presume that maybe some students are listening in, but most of you presumably are parents, and so this is a decision that you yourself made. So you're a very good audience for me to pose this question to. When I asked my undergraduates, why have children? they can make conjectures about what the advantages and disadvantages might be, but you have gone through it and may still be going through it in terms of having children in the house. Some of you may have other children already grown and out of the house. So the question is, why do it? We know that it doesn't appeal to everybody. I've got a quote in front of me. One author described a child as a kind of vicious dwarf of an innate cruelty, right? So this person obviously, I presume, didn't choose to have a child. I mean, we also know, of course, that some people who want to have children can't, and other people may find themselves with unexpected pregnancy, but in rough numbers, we can assume these sides cancel each other out. The overwhelming majority of people want to have children, choose to have children. Not everybody, not the person I just quoted, but most people do. But why? As parents, let me start by just making the negative case for you. And then what I'm going to do is throw it open and ask you to share with us why you think it might be worth doing, if you do think it's worth doing. Of course, some of you may agree, yeah, having children was really a mistake. And then maybe you'll want to be anonymous, in sharing that piece of information, lest your own children are listening in. But let me just very quickly rattle off some of the obvious disadvantages of having children. I mean, as we all know, that having children is an insanely, I myself do have 3 children. Having children is a huge responsibility, right? When you've got children, it's all you can do to catch any free time. And, it eats into your free time incredibly. You have to worry about making sure they're well fed, that when they're young, that their diapers are changed, that they're properly clothed, that they've gotten to the doctor. It's taking care of a young child or even a growing up adolescent. Huge responsibility. It's a huge emotional drain. In the sense that when your kids are sick, this cuts to the quick. For you, if your teenagers suffer, heartbreak, this hurts you. If your grown children, break up with their boyfriend or girlfriend, this can be overwhelming for you as well. I've already mentioned loss of freedom. When you've got children, you and your partner can't just say, oh, what the hell, let's go to New Orleans this weekend. Or, that concert, I saw there were some tickets tonight, because you've got to arrange for a babysitter. You can't just abandon your child or children for a few days. Having children is something like the death of spontaneity. And there can be professional costs, right? If you're spending time with your children, that's time you're not spending writing your books. If you're an academic, or you're not at the office working on your legal briefs or whatever it is, having children takes a huge cost in terms of our life. And in fact, the very first thing I'm curious about, the first thing I want to ask is about literally the financial cost of having a child. This is a question I posed to the undergrads in my life class, and I'm going to do this now too. If all goes well, in a second I'm going to ask Juliana to post a poll in which I'm going to ask you to guess. This will be more than a guess, it'll be a very highly educated guess because you've got children. I'm going to ask you to guess, what does it cost to raise a child from birth to age 18? And let's not include any college expenses at all, if any of your kids went off before age 18. So it's at home up to age 18, not college at all. What's the average American, average expense? I see the poll has now gone up. There's a range there. So launch the poll and please just vote. If you've got, you think it's 50,000 or less, put that down, 100,000, 150, to the nearest 50,000. Juliana, is the poll launched as far as you know?
Yes, it is. And people are voting. About 45% of folks on the call.
So I don't actually see the poll numbers as they're coming in, I guess, because I wasn't listed as a host. Let's give you guys about another 10 seconds to vote. And then at the end of the 10 seconds, I'll ask Juliana to
I'll read it out.
Close the poll and share the poll results.
Yep. So we are at 60% voting.
All right, let's just count down 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Close the poll and share the results with everybody. I'm curious what we've got here. All right, so that's interesting. The thing with the highest percent was $250,000. That's got 20%. This is, I think everybody should be able to see this now. And that's actually very accurate. Of course, as we see, there's a huge spread. 1% of you thought of $50,000 or less. 9% of you thought it was $400,000. You know, so 80% of you guessed something other than the average being 250,000. Of course, averages are averages, but in fact, that's not far. Let me see if I've got the statistics in front of me. All right, close the poll and take it down, Juliana, please. The average American, so how did I get this statistic? The US government actually produces a document. They say every year, the most recent one I could get was a couple of years ago. This was US Department of Agriculture of all things. The average American cost for a child born, I think in 2015, was estimated it was going to be $233,000. So for those of you who guessed about 250, you were pretty much on target. Of course, there's a lot of variation. Different parts of the country show up as more expensive, unsurprisingly. And again, unsurprisingly, if you are in a higher income bracket, you're likely to spend more money on your kids than lower income brackets. For people who are in the top third, if just divide all Americans into third in terms of household income, people in the top third, unsurprisingly, spend more. The most expensive part of the country is New England. And so, of course, I was especially interested in prices in New England and upper third income. That comes to, some of you may be interested in this, over $400,000 to raise a single kid. That's a single child from birth to 18. So, we've got responsibility, we've got emotional drain, we've got loss of freedom, we've got the loss of spontaneity, we've got an incredible cost, and that's out-of-pocket cost. I'm not even talking about, if you work less at the office and so don't get raises, or if you take the mommy track and so you don't get promotions, the lost income in that sense, I wasn't even counting that. Adds up to a pretty strong negative case. And again, in one more minute, I'm going to just throw it open and ask, so then what's on the other side? What's on the positive side? But one last quote before we do that. I found this off the internet, reading some of this literature. Here's the quote that one person said: "No one in their right mind would have children. They suck the very life out of you. All your energy, time, money, and more importantly, your emotional will and spirit. It's not just that you can't go out anymore, it's that you can't even sit and enjoy a movie at home because it's too hard to get even a 5-minute break from the child. And when you do get that 5-minute break, you're so tired, all you want to do is sleep. Your life ends when children come along because everything you're used to doing and all the things that have made you happy have to stop." As I say, one person posted that online, and then another person replied, quote, "If there was a product on the market that would do that to you, no one would buy it," unquote. All right, but you guys all bought it, so what's in it for you? That's the question I want you to answer. And so tell me, just put put the word comment or the word question in the chat box, and Juliana will call on somebody, ask you to, she'll unmute you, and you can share with everybody, is it a mistake to have children, or is there something in it? If so, what is it?
It looks like Peggy has her hand raised, so I will unmute her and she can ask her question. Peggy?
I wasn't going to ask a question. I was going to respond that during this incredible moment in time, this pandemic, having my children participating in the world has been an incredible source of light, even though I'm stuck in my house. So the fact that my son is at Yale and still finding ways to safely participate in the world, it just gives me, I'm incredibly proud of him. I think any parent would be in the same position to say it's so wonderful to watch them find their own place in the world, but to expand my little narcissism place. Yes, as a parent, you're a narcissist 100%, but it's always great to sort of see the parts of yourself that your children have, but then the things about them that have nothing to do with you, and having them contribute to the world.
Thank you, Peggy. That's a lot of interesting ideas. So you said you're proud of your children. That's an interesting idea. You also talked about being parts of yourself being there in your children. And of course, the contributions that they're making. Let me just pick up on one of those strands and talk about the parts of yourself. Sometimes, because I suppose what I want to hear is, do you mean this literally? In the sense of, you know, your biological material, unless your kids were adopted, if they're your biological offspring, then your children at least literally have some of your genetic material inside them. Or as I perhaps imagine you meant perhaps something more like it was something about you shaped them and you had an influence on who they were, and that's why you're taking pride. If Peggy's still unmuted, I wonder if Peggy could say a word more.
I am still here. I really loved seeing how their thought processes evolved and how they solved problems. And in that way, sometimes you see things that it's like, oh, I would have done it that way. And then sometimes you get to see, oh, I would have never, ever thought about approaching the world or the problem in that way. So I find that just incredibly fascinating, that you do get to learn about your own processes of addressing the world, but then you also get that expanded by watching their processes.
Right. So again, a number of rich ideas here. Sometimes I say to my students, look, children are really fascinating pets. They've got all, you know, you can teach them to talk, you can toilet train them, they can do cute pet tricks. And that way they're very absorbing. On the other hand, you know, you can't just, you know, unlike your dog that maybe you take them out a couple of times a day and you feed them and for the rest part, the dog will amuse itself. Your children are much more time consuming. So the sheer fascinating aspect, the fun aspect of these cool little toddlers romping around the house, or as you say, as they get older and they start thinking about things in unusual ways, I wonder whether or not we are special pleading if we emphasize that. Is that, can we really think, you know, if somebody said to you, so again, you know, the average price of having one child was at $250,000 in round numbers. If somebody said, I can show you a computer program that will look at things in a really different way from the way you look at things, and this program will only cost you $250,000, you'd say, yeah, that sounds interesting. You know, if you were talking $25 or $50, I'd give it a shot, right? I can get new perspectives by watching PBS, you know, listening to the Sunday morning talk shows or what have you, reading a couple of novels here and there. But $250,000 to get a new perspective, that seems awfully pricey. Somebody else have a thought about why we should have children?
Yes, so there's a comment from Hania, and she typed it in the chat. But Hania, I'm gonna give you the option of also unmuting and just sharing. But she commented that she chose to have children to have the experience of that particular kind of love. So Hania?
Hi, yeah, it's pronounced Hanya.
Hania.
That's all right. And yeah, you know, there's different kinds of love that human beings can experience. And I wanted to have that kind of experience. I wanted to have that kind of love. And so I did what I could with my intention to make it happen.
Before you, get muted again, so can you say something more about the kind of love that you've got in mind?
Love of a parent for a child.
Well, I presume that. I mean, that's the love you have for your child, but how is that different from the love you have for your friends or the love you have for your partner?
I don't know. I mean, I didn't know at the time I was making that decision. So all I knew is that it was going to be different from the kind of love I have for my husband or my siblings or my friends. And I don't know. It just was something I wanted to experience, and
Yeah.
I have no regrets.
Yeah. Regrets I'll get to maybe in another minute. So somebody, I went down to the chat box while you were talking when I posed the question, what's the special? And a couple of you have now put in the word unconditional love. And that's right. You might think, your friends, they love you, but sometimes you depart, your paths part from your friends. Your children love you in a kind of unconditional, unqualified way. I mean, sometimes this leads to heartbreak, right? We're tragically all familiar with cases of parents who abuse their children and their children just adore their parents back anyway. It seems to be hardwired into us to love our parents, for young children to love their parents in this unconditional way. And that's very interesting. On the other hand, now step back from that and ask, why would we think that's a good thing to have unconditional love? If my wife did choose, maybe foolishly, to spend her life with me, she knew me as an individual, picked me out from among the various people who are courting her, and said, okay, this is the person who has the qualities, is the kind of person I want to live with. That's a kind of very deep and very important validation for me. I think my wife is wonderful, and somebody as wonderful as that thinks I'm worthy of love. That's an amazing validation of me. Okay, good. But your children, the whole phrase unconditional love, your children, it's something different, right? Your children don't really have any choice about it. When I think about the analogy that comes to mind is like in these fantasy stories or science fiction stories where somebody goes and gets a love potion from the witch doctor or whatever it might be, or the local chemist, and says, I'm in love with Peggy Sue, but Peggy Sue doesn't love me. And you give Peggy Sue, you pour this into Peggy Sue's drink, and now she can't help but love you. Now, when we read those stories, there's something pathetic about, the character who gave somebody else the love potion, right? That this is the best that they can do to get unconditional love. It doesn't mean anything that Peggy Sue now loves them. It's just chemistry doing that. It's not as though this somehow says something attractive or positive about the person. So to the very extent the love of the child is unconditional, it seems strange to me that we would find that an attractive feature of the love that our children have towards us.
Professor Kagan, we have a couple comments if you want to take any.
Yeah, please go ahead. Who's next?
So we have Julia Jalbert. I'm not sure if Julia.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, I'm here. You can hear
Great.
me, right?
Yes.
I just want to say that I remember my children actually, and the process of raising children actually taught me a lot, and I think changed me as a person permanently. And that was not something I knew would happen, and I certainly wasn't expecting it. But that's say when they were little. I remember when they were babies, having to care for them, this life that depended on me to survive and will demand whenever it was good for him. And totally had no regard for my schedule and my life. Really forced me having to triage, having to set my priorities differently. And through the process, I like to think that I became a better person. I became better organized. I became more sympathetic and empathetic, perhaps. I remember myself being like super organized, very anal. I have everything planned down to the second. And then when things didn't go my way, I get very angry. And when I had children, started with my firstborn, nothing went the way I planned. And it was constantly having to figure out a different plan. And it's not just one backup plan. I can have plan A, plan B, plan C, and they will all fail me. And then in the end, I learned to play by ear. And I end up just having to enjoy whatever was happening, having a sense of humor, laugh about it sometimes, and move on. And that was something I did not have when I first, something I did not have even before I had children. It's something I picked up, and I think it made me a better person as a result.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm struck by that. I mean, it does seem to me that one argument for having children is it makes you a better person, although we might wonder about the ways in which it makes you a better person. But you said that one of the things it did was it forced you to become better organized and to learn to triage. I mean, that's a little bit like saying, I'm going to go out of my way to break my leg so I can learn how to deal with life on only one leg. So that would be a bizarre thing to test, right? I'm going to quit my job so I can learn how to survive on no money at all. Well, yeah, that would be a new skill, but why pick up that skill? There's got to be some further reason for having the child. Now, I'm poking fun on one strand of what you said, but of course there's another strand, which is you said, having children forced you to become more sympathetic. It forced you to become more empathetic. In effect, having children works a kind of moral transformation on us out of necessity as parents. And so we might think we are morally better individuals. And unlike being able to deal with having a broken leg, which seems like maybe that's a matter of necessity, but I can't see why that would be desirable in its own right. Maybe the thought that makes you a better person is desirable in its own right. Of course, even if we grant that, and I do want to grant that, I'm giving these views, of course, a hard time, but it's not that I think having children is a bad idea. What I do want to claim is it's sometimes harder to pin down why, if anything, is a good idea. If our goal was to become a better person, then why not volunteer at a soup kitchen? Why not, go read books for the blind, or visit the elderly in the community retirement home. These are also things that will improve your moral character. And unlike having children, you can do it on the weekends and be limited. Unlike with the children, you got to do it all the time. In fact, children take up so much of your time that it doesn't leave as much time for doing good deeds in a wider domain. So even from the moral perspective, you've improved your character, but you've improved your character while chaining you to a very specific domain for doing good deeds. It's not so obvious why that should be desirable. All right, Juliana, other people, other suggestions or comments?
Yeah. So Felipe has a comment to make. If Felipe Costellos, are you still there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. I think for me, it gave meaning to my life and to why I'm here. I think the day initially my daughter and now, our daughter and now our son, both of whom are at Yale, were born. Before, it was a lot about me. Once they were born, I realized that I had a different purpose in life, which was obviously a great responsibility, a lot of hard work, but immense satisfaction. And again, I think it gave me a purpose I didn't find before.
Purpose. What's the purpose, if you don't mind sharing a bit more?
The purpose was that it gave meaning to everything. First of all, it gave me a reason why I'm here. To me, working and enjoying myself was all about me. Obviously, it also, to your point earlier about the continuity of passing on our genes is something which is probably unconscious, but also that could survive us. But it really, it was something that was beyond just about being, doing things for myself. And obviously, we can do things for others and get satisfaction, but this was a different type of meaning in terms of how I felt about myself when they were born.
Right. So, I mean, part of what Philippe has just been suggesting is, I think, seconding the thought that Julia was sharing a few minutes ago, that somehow having kids transforms us and makes us into better people. Philippe was just saying, previously it was all about him, or maybe him and his partner, but now, of necessity, it became about the children as well. So there's a kind of moral education of having children. That's a little strange. I mean, I do certainly think it's true, but it's a little strange. I'm surprised by one thing. If you were to ask a typical person on the street, why have kids? I wouldn't have thought that it's an important part of your moral education. It's like going to church or watching documentaries about the poor. This is an important part of your moral education. I wouldn't have thought that was the main thought that would come to mind. I would have thought, and I don't know what to make of this, unless I've overlooked it. I mean, I know there's a lot of comments, which of course I'm not seeing, but I would have thought the answer that most people would have given would be, having children makes you happier. Now, maybe that was part of what Felipe was suggesting when he talked about kind of satisfaction. Maybe it's what Peggy initially had in mind when she talked about how kids added a kind of light to her life, which I had meant to follow up and ask her what exactly she meant by that metaphor. Maybe she means something like happiness. Certainly, if you poll people and ask, do children make you happy? Well, actually, before I tell you what the most recent poll results I've seen, we've just got a poll here up now. So let's take a second. Right? Does having children make you happier? So there's the poll. Answer yes or answer no. I hope you can all see the poll. Let's give you 15 seconds to vote on that. Does having children make you happier? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Close the poll and share the results with everybody so we can see what we get. So good. 95% of you say having children makes you happier. And indeed, the poll result I was going to quote was from 2006. That was 98%. So for all practical purposes, almost everybody who's a parent says, yes, having children makes you happier. So good. Now I want to take the poll down results down. Great. So now let's ask, is that really true? Does having children actually make you happier? Now, first, I mean, of course, you all voted yes. And so you might say, how could so many parents be mistaken about that? So let me notice an interesting possibility. Suppose that all these negative people that I was quoting towards the beginning of remarks, suppose that all these people were right. And children actually reduce your happiness. But we all think, 95% of you think having children makes you happier. So how could that be? How could so many people be confused? Well, what about the following possibility? Suppose there was a gene that blinded you to the facts about what children will do to your life. That is to say, normally, we're able to figure out what things make us happy and unhappy, but suppose this gene was very specific, and even though children reduce our happiness, this gene, if we had it, would actually fool us, delude us into thinking having children makes us happy, makes us happier. Now imagine then there were two gene pools, right? There'd be the people who have the gene that allows you to notice the truth, and there'd be the people who have the gene that deceives you into thinking that children will make you happy, even though it makes you miserable. And then ask yourself, which gene is going to spread in the population as a whole? Well, you know, pretty obviously, the people who see the truth that having children is going to make you miserable are going to decide not to have children, so they won't reproduce, and that means that gene won't spread. The gene that's going to spread is going to be the gene that would deceive us into thinking that children make us happier. And so maybe the fact that we all think having children makes us happier is nothing more than evidence that there's this weird gene blinding us to the facts. And so of course we all vote because we're all the descendants of the people who have this illusion creating gene. Well, look, that seems like a possibility. It's a science fiction possibility. I'm not a biologist, right? I'm not an evolutionary psychologist. It's not like I have any evidence at all that there is such a gene. Well, when I said I don't have any evidence at all, maybe that's a little bit quick, because there is some empirical research on whether or not having children actually makes you happier. So I'm a philosopher. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a sociologist, but social scientists sometimes will go around and ask people to score themselves. How happy are you right now? You know, on a scale of 1 to 7. 7's, you know, ecstatically happy, 1's miserable, right? On a scale of 1 to 7, how happy are you? And then they take all this data and they can plot it across what stage of family life, you know, is the person or the couple, you know, reporting. And interestingly enough, you get the following result. This is all, you know, in terms of self-reporting, how happy we take ourselves to be right now. Couples will report themselves as being very happy, the happiest, before they start having children. Then, when they start having children, their self-reported happiness score goes down. and this one won't be a surprise to anybody, I'm sure. When the children are teenagers, the happiness score hits rock bottom. And it kind of stays there until the children start leaving home, right? You know, we all talk about, oh, the empty nest syndrome. It's so sad to see my kids go off to Yale, right? We all thought that, you know, we all, but still, when you ask people to report yourself, now that the kids are beginning to leave the house, what do you feel? The happiness score goes up. And it gets its highest level when they finally have all left the house, although it's never as high as it was before you started having kids in the first place. Well, that's sort of intention, isn't it? With, you know, yeah, here 95% of the people who voted said, yeah, right, having kids made me happy. But in fact, in terms of the actual data, that doesn't seem to be true at all. Having children lowered the happiness curve. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, maybe the happiness curve always goes down like in middle age, right? And it would be even worse if you didn't have kids. But no, the social scientists, they thought of that as well. And yeah, people who don't have kids, their happiness curve may go down a little, but it never goes down nearly as much as it does once you start having kids. So maybe it really is an illusion that having kids makes you happier. In which case, we now really do have to come back to the question, you know, so if that's not the reason to have children, what is the reason to have children? Other suggestions, other proposals? Yeah, sorry.
We have a comment from Margie, and I'm gonna unmute her.
Hi there.
Hey, Margie.
I was just saying I like this gene theory, you know, the thought of a gene that's kind of causing us to think of things as, you know, maybe make us forget some of these things, you know, in the various stages. Like in the thick of it, you know, it's really hard, but then something makes us forget how hard it is so that we keep going. You know, the sleepless nights when you have a new baby, and then the 3-year-old sassy tantrums, and then the preteens giving us grief, and then these risk-taking teenagers. I feel like all those stages are so hard and make us unhappy, and I'm in, you know, the thick of it, on and off. But then we seem to forget it, and then that sort of the happiness ends up prevailing, and the days are long, the slog is long, but then the years are suddenly short. And I feel like that's where the happiness comes in, is sort of after you've done the slog, after you've lived through it.
So two thoughts. Actually, I was about to suggest something about pregnancy and labor, and I saw somebody quickly put that in the chat box. I didn't catch the name, but you know, maybe it's like women in labor, right? Women in labor are in a tremendous amount of pain, and sometimes, you know, as an observer of my wife giving birth, I found myself wondering, how did anybody willingly put themselves through this? And then maybe there's just some genetic thing that makes that all get kind of foggy looking back. So maybe Margie is suggesting something similar, that yeah, having kids really sucks. That's a technical philosophical term. But there's something that makes our thinking kind of foggy. We can see the misery when we look at other people's families, but when we focus our attention on our own family, somehow we're not able to notice it. I mean, that's one possibility. I mean, it's kind of a depressing thought if it's true, but that's one possibility. But another thing that Margie just suggested was, it's the long slog that you have to get through to later stages. You know, a question that some social psychologists have asked is, maybe your happiness level goes down while the kids are in the house, but when you have grown children, isn't that when the payoff, you know, is there? And so, you know, well, they've studied this well. No, it turns out to be true that it is true that your self-reported happiness level is higher with grown children than it was when you had teenagers in the house. But still, the couples in their 60s, you know, who have grown children, like my wife and me, we're still on average less happy than the couples in the 60s who never had children at all. So the long slog may not be worth it. Although one proposal that I remember one student in my class suggested was that having children is the necessary cost of getting grandchildren, right? With grandchildren, you get all the advantages, none of the costs. Unfortunately, there's no way to get grandchildren without having children. So children is just the price you've got to pay. You know, I mean, that could be true, but again, it would be sort of depressing if that was the best that we've got. Juliana, somebody else.
Yep, we have Cecilia Wheeler. Cecilia?
Hi, yeah, I was going to say, I think in a way that maybe those who get kids are simply the optimistic ones, the ones who kind of go for the survival and think that having the kids it will work out somehow and it will be good in the long run, and you just go for it. And maybe those who don't really think that kids will be fun, or that they don't have the patience for it, they won't have it. But I think it would be quite interesting to consider how many people who had kids, say 20 years ago, like most of us, I imagine, would want to have kids if it would be today, now, in a world with climate change and, you know, gloom and doom all over the world. Would we still be the optimistic ones? And it's not a challenging question to this group. It's just as a food for thought.
Yeah, no, it is a great question. I mean, when you start thinking about, as you say, the decision to have a child under current circumstances where climate change has become a pressing issue that we're all conscious of, but was barely on anybody's consciousness 20 years ago, or in my case, my kids are 25, 30, 32. You know, when I first started having children, I don't think I was aware of the concept of climate change. There does become a kind of moral question here. In today's talk, I'm focusing simply on the self-interested question: what's in it for me in terms of the decision to have kids, or you as parents like me, you know, looking back, what has been in it for you? And especially if this happiness thing's a kind of illusion, what other things might there be? But there's also, of course, not just the self-interested question, there's the moral question, which Cecilia raises. We don't normally think about the decision to have children as a moral question. But it's hard to see why it shouldn't be. So let me think about the following. So suppose, I don't know, suppose somehow the world wakes up and we get our act together with regard to climate change, and technological breakthroughs are made, and we get carbon scrubbers or whatever it is that can reverse the amount of greenhouse gases. And so we're back to a situation where we think we can, the Earth can remain habitable for thousands, indeed millions, if not billions of years. I don't know how many kids, of course, the people listening have, how many kids you have, but odds are you could have had one more kid. So let's just suppose that you could have had another child. And I hope you're loving parents, and so you would have raised a happy child. And let's suppose that Cecilia's worries are bracketed or responded to or dealt with, so that, yeah, the child will go on to have a rich, satisfying life. Would we have a moral duty to have such an extra child? Actually, we've got one more poll. This is the last poll. So, do you have a moral duty? Maybe, for some of us, it may be too late to do that. But, think back during your your procreating days. Do you have a moral duty to have an additional happy child? Assuming that you could afford it, assuming that the world is such that it's not that we're all going to end in nuclear war next week, and so they'll die horribly. Do you have a moral duty to have basically as many happy children as you could? Do you, is that what morality asks of us? If you think the answer to that is yes, you should vote yes. If you think the answer to that is no, you should vote no. Give it a couple more seconds.
Professor Kagan, there are actually a couple questions that from a few folks that I might merge into one, because folks are asking, why is happiness a metric? Is there a different kind of metric we could be using? Are there different kinds of happiness? So
great. So that's a great question. Let's close the poll and let's just share it so we can see what people voted on that. I'm curious. So 79% of you, that's wonderful, said no, right? We don't, 21% of you said yes. So look, most people don't think we have a duty to have, more and more kids. From the philosophical point of view, that's certainly the common position. From the philosophical point of view, that's a little bit puzzling. I said this was the last poll, so I won't put up one more poll, but I'll just show you give you a quick feel for the puzzle. Suppose that you were thinking of having another child, and you're talking to your doctor. Your doctor informs you, if you get pregnant now, your child will have some genetic defect that will lead them to suffer and die at a very, very, very young age, and there's nothing we'll be able to do for them. So they'll be what in philosophy gets called the miserable child. Short, unhappy life, as we might put it. Better never to have been born at all than to have this life of physical pain. Maybe they can't develop psychologically to love or appreciate their surroundings. If we had put up another poll and I asked, is it okay to have the miserable child? I imagine almost all of you, maybe all of you, would say no. It's immoral, it's wrong, it's morally forbidden to have the miserable child. We have a moral duty not to have the miserable child. But once we say that, and as I say, this was what people typically vote, then it does become puzzling. If misery is such that it can create a moral duty not to have the child, shouldn't we also think that happiness, a life worth living, has the moral force to create a duty to have the happy child? Yet 79, almost 80% of you, 4 out of 5, thought there was no such duty. And so there's a kind of asymmetry in terms of how we vote. You're forbidden to have unhappy children, but you're not required to have happy children. There's some kind of asymmetry. And from the philosophical point of view, that's very, very puzzling. But This was a kind of sidebar on morality. And as I said, the main issue is really having us talk about today. The main issue is the one, why have children, not from the moral point of view, but just in terms of what's in it for me as a potential parent? Why would I want to go ahead and have children, given the cost, given the loss of freedom, given the extra responsibility, given the death of spontaneity, given the emotional costs? Why in the world would I want to do that? Especially given the empirical evidence that seems to suggest having children reduce your happiness. And so this then points us to the question that Juliana gleaned from a number of you, namely, why is happiness the metric? And the answer, of course, could be, maybe happiness isn't the metric. Maybe having children reduces your happiness, but gives you something else that's, if we ask, what are the ingredients of a life for me worth living for my sake, right? What is well-being? What is the best kind of life for that person to live in terms of its benefit to the person whose life it is? Happiness seems like one of the ingredients. There are philosophical views that say it's the whole story. And if it is the whole story and these social scientists are right, then we're in trouble. Maybe we all made a mistake in having kids. But maybe happiness is only one of the ingredients in terms of the kind of life I want to have for my own sake. And there's some other ingredients that go into well-being, having the best kind of life, not in terms of meeting my moral responsibilities, but in terms of benefit to me. Good, that's a real possibility. If we had even more time, there are some interesting philosophical thought experiments that suggest that might well be so. But that's a placeholder. That doesn't tell us what are the other ingredients, and does having children give you those other ingredients? Now, we've had one proposal like that. We've had the moral education proposal. Having children lowers your happiness, but turns you into a better person. Yeah, all right. That's not much of a sales job, I think, even if it's true. Are there other ingredients? Are there other suggestions any of you guys want to make? Juliana.
Yes. So Irene Hackman has a comment. I will unmute. Irene?
Yes, hopefully I can actually be articulate after a whole day on Zoom. So my thought at this point is I'm not as good a person as I thought I was, because I'm feeling very selfish after this whole conversation. I'm actually one of the people who said that I don't think happiness is necessarily what we're all after. I think it's a very uniquely North American concept, really, that's really what we're all after. I honestly feel that, and several people mentioned love, I honestly feel that as social animals, it's an evolutionary thing, it's a social thing. I think all of us are chasing after love, loving, being loved, and not in the frou-frou sense of the romantic love and all that, but I think in the very, very deep psychological kind of need type of love. So I honestly, I think that the conversation would go in a different direction if we were to think about, if we were to look at it as a person, as a mom. I can't even imagine feeling this deep love for any other person than my child. And I think in a way we are all chasing after that kind of feeling. I didn't know that's what I was chasing before I had children, but it kind of makes sense to me now, just thinking about where I was at that point in life. So that's all I wanted to say. Just kind of.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, Irene. I mean, of course, this is connected. Somebody did propose earlier love, and then I asked what kind of love, and some people in the chat box put in unconditional love, and then I started comparing unconditional love to a love potion, which seems more pathetic than desirable. You avoided that language by talking about deep love, the kind of intensity of love that one feels for one child. Is indeed, I've experienced nothing else like that. And love does indeed seem to me to be one of the things worth having in life. Of course, the very love we have for our children also exposes us in a way. It makes us vulnerable. Nobody can hurt you in the way that your children not only can in principle, but almost inevitably will hurt you. I imagine Irene's going to want to insist, yeah, she's been hurt, but the benefits of having that kind of love outweigh the genuine and undeniable costs, and maybe that's true. It would be nice to have the social psychologists, social scientists go back and ask some of these more fine-grained questions. When you ask people to score themselves on terms of happiness, it seems, when I've been asked to do this sort of thing in surveys, I always think, what's my mood right now? What kind of buzz am I having? And maybe that's a very superficial and unimportant ingredient. And maybe love is a more important ingredient in a life worth living. That is the reason why it's, I think it was the second topic we talked about, in our life class. Just what is love and why is it worth sacrificing so much for the sake of it. Joliana, do I recall correctly, we agreed that we're going to wrap up at 5:30? Is that right?
Yes, correct.
So what I don't remember was the answer to, so we're going to wrap up this session officially in a moment. Are we able to stick around for anybody who wants to continue talking for a while?
Yes, of course.
All right, so I'm sorry that we don't have, officially more time. Of course, anybody could have left us anytime they felt like, but let me just declare this session now officially over. Thank you very much for your thoughts and contributions. Some really interesting ideas here. Anybody who'd like continue throwing ideas for at least a while longer, I'll stick around. My helpful assistant, Joliana, will continue calling on people, and we'll see what other ideas you want to have to share. But for everybody, thanks very much, and congratulations on having children at Yale. This is an amazing thing, amazing place for them to spend 4 years.
Yes, I couldn't have said it any better. Professor Kagan, thank you so much. For those of you, I just wanted to remind you that we have another lecture with Professor Camille Thomason tomorrow and a host of other events. I just shared the link to our website where you can find all the information that will be relevant. And if you want to stick around, definitely feel free to, and we will continue the conversation. Thank you all for being here and spending an hour with us today.